Yeah, good evening. This is the Transfer Show. Mark McAdam, Michael Bridge are with me to discuss and analyse the biggest deals of the day. And with 7 days to go, that's it, 7 days, everyone is predicting a frantic end to the summer transfer window.
So I don't know what's going to happen at the end of the market. Maybe happen something.
Anything can happen both ways, and you have to be ready.
I'm aware that there's still work going on behind the scenes.
Mark will lead the team as a captain tomorrow.
Difficult for me to be talking about it because it's not official yet, but I have to say that it's very close.
I would expect the next week to obviously be busy as a whole.
With a week ago, there's still a little bit to do.
I would love to share all that. I think it would be very, very interesting, but I won't.
Can't be towards the end of a transfer window without using the clash. Should I stay or should I go? Might be what Raheem Sterling is asking himself at the moment. Plenty for him and Chelsea to sort out, of course, in the coming days. Mark McAdam, let's start with you. With regard to Raheem Sterling, do his options seem a little bit limited just now?
Certainly at the moment you'd have to look at the situation and feel that Raheem Sterling's in a little bit of a corner, because when you played for Liverpool, Manchester City and now Chelsea, there's not too many bigger clubs in the Premier League that you could go to, and there's probably only, 6 or 7 clubs in European football that could afford to pay the wages that Raheem Sterling is currently earning at Chelsea. We know that he's still got 3 years left on his current deal, which is a problem, and the fact he is one of the highest earners at Chelsea is also an issue. But it seems like, based on what the club's said, what Enzo Maresca has said publicly, it doesn't feel like he's going to get much game time, if any at all, this season. So there needs to be some sort of a compromise. We know that Raheem Sterling has so much quality. You know, he's won the Premier League. He's still only 29 years old. He's still at a great age. He's desperate to get back in the England setup. He wants to prove to people he can still compete at the very highest level. We've seen him on the international stage. We've seen him play in the Champions League as well. And he's got so much to offer. But when you're earning that much money and with just a week left in the window, it does feel like there are not too many options, and we understand that he wants to be settled as well. His family are very settled in London. So again, you start to look at those potential options, and it doesn't appear that there will be that many.
Michael, Mark said not too many options, but we know at least one club who are definitely interested in him.
We mentioned the clash, another classic London calling. I mean, Palace are a club that would like another winger/forward. We mentioned a few weeks ago about potential deal for Wilf Zaha. The finances that meant that looked unlikely. Now, Palace would be keen on Raheem Sterling, but I think the finances, again, might dictate a bit of difficulty there. But as the days rumble on, with a few days remaining in the window, maybe there could be some room for negotiation between Chelsea, Crystal Palace or another club. But I thought it was quite interesting hearing from Oliver Glasner today. He didn't completely rule it out, did he?
Yeah, I mean, we did mention yesterday that Crystal Palace were interested in Raheem Sterling, and as timing would have it, Oliver Glasner, the Crystal Palace boss, held his press conference ahead of the weekend's game today, and this is what he had to say about Raheem Sterling.
I think you can name 20 players from Chelsea, especially because they have a big squad, and Raheem Sterling is a fantastic player, but doesn't mean that he will be a Crystal Palace player, but he plays for many years in the Premier League. He always scores goals. I don't know how many appearances he has for England, so yeah, he's a great player, but I don't know what happens with him.
Yeah, he's not ruling it out, but there are a number of other managers who have been asked about the Chelsea situation, and in particular Raheem Sterling as well. Now, given his history with Mikel Arteta, it was no surprise that the Arsenal manager was one of those managers who was also asked about Raheem Sterling, and this was Arteta's response.
No, I can talk with my time with Raheem. That was exceptional. I think we built a really strong relationship together. He was unbelievable at the time that we were together, and he taught me a lot as well about the individuals, how the players think, how we give them support and help them, and he's someone that I really have strong feelings about.
Yeah, so Arteta and Arsenal may not be signing Sterling, but that's not a bad reference to put on the CV, is it, what Arteta's just said?
very complimentary, and you'd expect that as well. Mikel Arteta worked with Raheem Sterling for 3 seasons at Manchester City, and if you spoke to Raheem privately, he'd say, well, the assistant manager to Pep Guardiola was someone that really influenced me, helped me and developed me as a player, and helped me be a part of that Manchester City setup where I won a number of Premier League titles. So it's mutual respect from Mikel Arteta. I'm sure if you spoke to Mikel privately and said, look, would you like to have Raheem Sterling? He said, yeah, but the problem is I have to get the balance of the squad right. Financially, things have to work out for me. And we have to make sure we don't just bring in players for the sake of it. We have to bring in players that can play. And this is the problem with Raheem Sterling. He is a match winner. He's a Premier League winner. He's a top-class Premier League player. He will not want to go into a setup and just sit on the bench or be a bit part player. He'll want to start week in, week out and show that he's still got that quality to get back in the England setup.
Just on that, if, for argument's sake, Arsenal were in for Raheem Sterling, we've seen earlier on in this transfer window, Chelsea decided Conor Gallagher wasn't part of their plans. And they effectively, whether we agree with it or not, effectively chose his club in Atletico Madrid. If Chelsea were to sell or loan out Raheem Sterling, Arsenal probably wouldn't be on that list, would it?
No, absolutely not. I think this is what is going to be so fascinating about the last 7 days of the window, is that Chelsea will, without question, be big players because they have a number of players that are surplus to requirements. As Enzo Maresca has said quite publicly, he works with his group and the rest, not his concern. And that's where it will be up to Lawrence Stewart, Paul Winstanley and the hierarchy at Chelsea to try and find the right exit clauses for these players, some of whom are on big wages. But as the days progress, they are going to have to soften their approach about what the loan fee is, what the wage compensation is. Right, we'll pay 50%. Actually, tomorrow they might pay 25% because they just need to get these players out the door. And that might suit Raheem Sterling. But you'd find it very difficult to see Arsenal getting a deal with Chelsea that suits Arsenal, because Chelsea will say, well, hang on, we can compromise, but for certain clubs, and Arsenal certainly probably wouldn't be one of them.
Yeah, you mentioned the link between Raheem Sterling and Mikel Arteta. Of course, he was a coach at Manchester City and an assistant, of course, to Pep Guardiola. Now, Manchester City have already re-signed one former player this week. I'm sure we'll be talking about Ilkay Gundogan later on in the show. So what about Sterling? Well, Pep Guardiola was asked the question. Safe to say he was caught a little bit off guard.
How likely or possible maybe Raheem Sterling? Any chance you might want to bring him back to Manchester City as well?
He's a Chelsea player. Absolutely. A Chelsea player. I know I feel so attached with the time we live together with Raheem, and of course I feel attached with Enzo. So I just wish him all the best. But he's of course a Chelsea player.
Yeah, he's still a Chelsea player. Talking about Chelsea players who seem to be cast aside, Mark, Romelu Lukaku. Are we any closer to a resolution now?
Yeah, we've been speaking about this man. It feels like for every single transfer window for as long as we've been doing these shows, he's been a constant fixture, hasn't he? And once again, he's at the front of the queue when it comes to the exit door at Stamford Bridge. Now, we've had a little bit of a development in the course of the last hour or so on Sky Sports News, and we are now in the situation of understanding that Chelsea and Napoli are close to agreeing a deal for Romelu Lukaku. This would obviously see him going back to Italy, where he's just spent 2 spells on loan in the last 2 seasons. There's been significant progress that's been made between Chelsea and Napoli, and Antonio Conte has been insistent throughout the course of this summer that Romelu Lukaku is his #1 target. That is the one player that he would like at the football club. The two sides, we understand, are closer than ever before to completing a deal. You have to be careful with the language here, but things are edging closer to being sorted. We've been told they're within touching distance of completing a deal, and this would be a permanent move as well. We've been reporting throughout the course of this summer that Chelsea would like 40 million euros for Lukaku. We know there are not too many clubs that are willing to pay that sort of money. We know last summer the Saudi Pro League were interested in taking Lukaku, but he made it very clear that he wasn't interested. He wanted to stay within European football. It looks like now, based on this information we're getting, that Chelsea and Napoli are close to finding that compromise.
It just feels there has to be an inevitability about this deal happening, simply because it feels a bit of brinkmanship is going on between the two clubs, because there's an air of desperation from both clubs, you'd have to say, to try and get this deal over the line. Chelsea will argue that Napoli are desperate. You mentioned Antonio Conte. It's his first choice. They've started the season horrifically. He called it a shameful performance against Hellas Verona. So Chelsea are thinking, well, they're desperate. Let's charge what we can. Whereas Napoli are saying, well, yeah, but he's not in your squad. He's been ostracised. He's training away from the first team. And not only that, show me the other clubs that are interested in signing Romelu Lukaku. It's only us. And show me the other clubs that Romelu Lukaku wants to go to. There aren't any. It's only Napoli. So I think it's one of these situations where everyone will want to claim victory at the end of it. I think Napoli ideally would have wanted to do a loan with an obligation, but they've moved towards this permanent deal that Chelsea would want. But still, we understand it's not near what the valuation would be. We think it's a €30 million deal plus a percentage of the sell-on as well. 31 years old, Romelu Lukaku. When you're talking about sell-on, potentially Saudi Arabia.
I was going to say, it just protects Chelsea a little bit more. You just never know with sell-ons because you don't know how a player's going to develop. You know, you look at Dom Solanke going from Bournemouth to Spurs. Liverpool put a sell-on in all those years ago, and then 5-6 years later, they recoup some more money back in the millions. So could be a clever piece of business because if Lukaku gets that option to go to Saudi and there's a sizable fee, Chelsea might just bank a little bit more money.
And where does this all leave a move for Victor Osimhen?
Yeah, this is another one that's, feels like we've been talking about for some time. The situation really goes back to December last year, where Victor Osimhen signed a new bumper contract at Napoli. Napoli inserted a large release clause, thinking that this summer someone would come and pay it, and they'd relieve us of these wages that we've given to the star striker, Victor Osimhen. We understand he's earning around £200,000 a week net after tax. So therefore, once again, similarly to Lukaku and Sterling, there are very few clubs in the world that could afford to pay those types of wages. A number of Premier League sides would obviously be in that list. We know that Chelsea are in the market for number 9. We know that Enzo Maresca has said quite publicly this week, I'd love to have a number 9, a new striker at the football club. Victor Osimhen would certainly tick all the boxes in terms of a football perspective, but financially, can Chelsea get to where Napoli need to go? You talk about brinkmanship. You talk about being a poker player. At the moment, this is a very similar situation because you've got Napoli that actually need to let Victor Osimhen go because financially they can't afford to keep him. But Chelsea don't want to pay the huge release clause and have to be creative with regards to the wages. We've seen, again, Chelsea trying to get rid of those big earners week by week, but stretch the finance over a longer period of time. So therefore it suits them with regards to accountancy purposes. So yeah, Victor Osimhen, we know the two clubs are still in dialogue at the moment, but there's been no immediate progress on the deal.
OK, file that one under saga. I think we might be talking about this one right up until the final hours of deadline day. But let's get the latest on a few more other deals, some a little further along than others, and we're talking about sagas. This one could be coming towards an end, Michael. Yeah. Arsenal's pursuit of Mikel Merino. What can you tell us?
Yeah, coming to an end, and I think from Real Sociedad's point of view, they feel that the end is pretty much it's done because they've wished him well. The head coach has thanked him very much. Came into the age of 22 and the trophy he won there and how much he's improved. They'll be getting around 32.5 million, including add-ons. Now, from what we're told from Arsenal, there's work to do on the Arsenal end, having to do a medical and just sign off on those personal terms. But what we've told you, what you've been saying over the past few weeks, the key is he wants to come and he's excited to come. And no wonder Arsenal fans are excited because it looks another strong signing.
Mark, with Mikel Merino's arrival at Arsenal looking imminent, it could probably further limit the game time of Fabio Vieira, whose game time has been limited anyway without any more arrivals. Reports tonight he could be on the way out.
Yeah, this is a story that David Ornstein actually reported on and put out into the public domain not that long ago, and we're just chasing up with our sources as well. But we understand this is something that has legs. Now, Fabio Vieira joined Arsenal from Porto in the summer of 2022 for a fee in excess of £30 million. But like you've rightly touched upon, game time has been very limited. And when you look at the appearances last season for Arsenal in all competitions, it was only 17. So once again, He's not getting the minutes that he deserves, and we understand that Porto have agreed a deal in principle with Arsenal over a potential loan deal for Fabio Vieira. 24-year-old needs to get game time. Not quite worked out in North London, but this could be the perfect opportunity to kickstart his career again.
So Merino on his way in, Fabio Vieira potentially on his way out, and another potential departure is the goalkeeper Aaron Ramsdale. Now, we do know that Ajax were interested earlier on in this transfer window. They went in with a loan deal. Arsenal really insistent on a permanent deal, or at least a loan with an obligation. Wolves, they were interested as well, and we think, remain interested in Aaron Ramsdale, and he's on a list of goalkeeper targets for Bournemouth. But the latest club who are showing strong interest in the Arsenal England goalkeeper is Southampton. They are in talks with Arsenal. They've discussed the potential conditions of a deal, a loan initially, and potential obligations to buy Ramsdale if Southampton indeed end up staying up. Arsenal, as I mentioned, they are insisting on a permanent deal, and in the background, behind the scenes, they continue to work on potential replacements, because I'm sure they could foresee this happening with David Raya taking over the number one position last season when he arrived from Brentford. Aaron Ramsdale realistically needed to move away to get more regular first-team football. So Arsenal are exploring other options, and Joan Garcia from Espanyol is one that they are doing a lot of work on behind the scenes if the eventuality arrives that Aaron Ramsdale will leave the club. So that's another one to watch in the last week of this transfer window, as is Manuel Ugarte from PSG to Manchester United. And I think we have been mentioning this for about 88 days.
And counting. Yeah, so Manchester United very much in the market to strengthen, as you've said so many times on the transfer show throughout the course of this summer, Dharmesh. Manchester United just have to be a little bit aware and creative, not just financially, but also with regards to the numbers in their squad. There's not a strict one-in, one-out rule. However, they have to be conscious of what they do. We know that Manuel Ugarte is a player very much on their radar. We know that they have been in dialogue with PSG. He's not, incidentally, in the squad tonight as they play in the league against Montpellier. So, once again, that's always a good signal for us when we're talking about transfers, whether a player is in a squad or not in a squad, as to how close potentially a deal could be. They obviously don't want to risk him. He doesn't want to risk getting injured, because this could be a mammoth move for him. There's a willingness from all parties to get a deal done. PSG are open to selling him either permanently or potentially on loan. That is also an option that's being discussed with an obligation. We know that Manchester United would like to strengthen in that area, and there are potential departures at Old Trafford as well, which would free up space and finance for Erik ten Hag to get this deal done. It's not close at this stage, but once again, one to keep an eye on, because it's definitely a player that Manchester United would like to sign.
Yeah, just on PSG, you mentioned that Ugarte not part of tonight's squad against Montpellier. Another player who's not part of that PSG squad is Carlos Soler, the midfielder. We've been telling you that West Ham United have been in talks. Well, they remain in talks. There are other clubs interested in Carlos Soler, but West Ham remain hopeful of completing that deal. And while selling players is a big priority for West Ham United in the final week, it's thought a move for Soler is not dependent on sales, though West Ham, as we do know, are listening to offers for the likes of Maxwell Cornet and Kurt Zouma. Again, another one to watch in the final week of this transfer window. Michael, don't go anywhere, because we will be joined by a special guest after the break. One of the big deals of this transfer window saw Emile Smith-Rowe move from Arsenal. It is his agent, Jordan White, and he'll be joining us in the studio right after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Transfer Show. Now, one of the big deals, as we told you before the break, in this transfer window was Emile Smith-Rowe's £34 million move from Arsenal to Fulham. And the man who masterminded it all was his agent, Jordan Wise. I'm delighted to say he's joined us in the studio now. Jordan, thanks so much for taking time out and joining us on the Transfer Show. I just want to ask you generically, before we specifically ask you about Emile, what you've made of the window so far as a whole, especially with the added complication, if you like, with profit and sustainability rules.
Yeah, I think it was kind of slow to get cooking, which is kind of commonplace when you see an overlapping of a big summer tournament in the Euros. And quite often you see, out of season managers that might have, certain targets. They've got the time to be able to go to the Euros, take closer view on some of their targets, and then post-tournament be able to advance conversations and escalate things to a transfer. And then on subject of PSR, obviously profit sustainability rules came in 2015, and before that FFP. So I think a lot of clubs are very well accustomed to keeping their clubs financially healthy. But they're, certainly over the last few years, finding new creative ways of being able to, explore, but potentially even exploit, like those grey areas.
Creative ways and exploiting those grey areas. Just, if you can elaborate on that a little bit, what do you mean?
This is the transfer show, not the finance show, so I'll try and keep it as a top line. But, certainly hot press has been Chelsea Football Club over the last 2 years, amortisation, signing players on longer than traditional deals, 7 years, 8 years, and that enables them to stretch the transfer fees over that prolonged period, and thus reducing the annual financial impact on their bottom lines. And a second one, top line, would be forward financing. So let's say you have a Premier League club with 50,000 season tickets. Let's say the average price of a season ticket is £2,000. It's £100 million in revenues a year. Rather than waiting year on year for that £100 million to come in, they could have a conversation with their bank or another bank and look at ways in which they could forward them those revenues, or a proportion of those revenues. So let's take that example. Club generates £100 million a year, has a conversation with the bank, and they say, look, we'll put together a deal that sees us maybe contribute 80% over the 5 years. So £400 million. And what we'll do is, rather than you wait over the 5-year period, we'll pay it in 2 years, discount some interest, maybe 20, 30 million, and that enables the club to have, £300 million plus available to them to deploy in, however they best see fit, basically.
Wow.
But that's for another show.
You had a busy one. Let's go back to Emile Smith-Rowe. We can see him in the background there. Can you tell us a little bit about the timeline from when you get that first call from Edu, I guess, and they say, look, we'd allow Emile to go, and then how does that work, and then you end up at Fulham?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's common practice in the agency world or in any form of management, especially in football. Post-season, you'll have a catch-up with the club, maybe the coaching staff, maybe some senior management, and kind of reflect on the season. Definitely pushing conversations more often than not when your player maybe hasn't had as much game time as he would have liked. Obviously, in the example of Emile, played just one Premier League start. I think it was just under 350 minutes. So it's kind of obvious that a conversation needed to be had. And so really, conversation started there. And I think what's important to add is, from the beginning, there's never ever been any articulation from the club that, Emile was a player that they wanted to actively sell. There wasn't us knocking on the door saying, hey, we want to get the hell out of here. There was always just a recognition that, from a footballing perspective, he hadn't seen as much game time as he would have liked. He's obviously a top player, and that's been demonstrated over seasons in the past. And that there was an openness and a willingness that, if the right opportunities presented themselves through that process, there would be very strong consideration to, if certain boxes got ticked, that they would facilitate a deal.
What was Emile's reaction when you first told him about Fulham's interest?
I think from the end of the season and certainly post conversations with Arsenal, as I said, there was always that openness to kind of assess the market and see if there were any clubs who were maybe interested in Emil. And of course, it goes without saying, it's obvious why there would be an attraction towards going to a club like Fulham. We could spend all day talking about it. You know, got a great manager. It's a London-based club. They play a very attractive attacking style of football. But outside of that, as I said, you're not making any firm decisions off the back of one call. You know, clubs are always putting the feelers out to gauge your interest as much as establishing a recognition that they're interested in your player. But we were definitely open-minded around the pros and the cons of, you know, whether it be staying in the Premier League, going to Europe. You just saw, obviously, Connor go to Madrid. You know, that will have with it some pros and some cons. So you're constantly, you know, assessing what it could look like if you went there. And again, as I said, it's the beginning of the process. So there's many more conversations to have. And once you've got the blessing of the club, speak to the manager and understand exactly what the project is.
Wasn't just Fulham, though, interested, was it? Can you tell us about the other clubs that showed some interest?
Yeah, I mean, obviously some were well documented. There was strong consideration from both the Premier League and from Europe. And the most important element across all of it that was really a main driver was, you know, what would it look like in terms of game time? You know, 2 seasons, I think only 2 Premier League starts over the 2 seasons. And so really that was the main objective is whatever the next project looked like, you know, where did he sit in terms of game time?
Jordan, the Arsenal fans love him. They've made a song with him and Saka. He's one of their own. So when you do a transfer deal, I'm guessing it's difficult enough trying to get a transfer over the line. But how much more difficult was it because of the emotion attached to this particular deal?
It's an interesting question. I think in terms of the process, of course, look, Arsenal fans have a really strong affinity towards Emil and the other way around. And that doesn't just sit with Arsenal fans. I think senior management at Arsenal obviously have a very strong affinity towards Emil. If anything at all, I would say it maybe made it easier. Not in terms of actually facilitating the transfer in the end, but in terms of the process, there was an awareness all the way through from Arsenal that, you know, as I said, if certain boxes got ticked and it transpired that there was something there or multiple options there that were to be considered strongly, that there was a right way to do it. So they were very conscious of the narrative around, you know, letting one of their own ultimately go. But in the end, he went. And I think when you look at all of the criteria that needs to get ticked to see a transfer happen, you know, one of those was acting in the best interest of Emil.
Can you give us an insight into those conversations? I know, of course, they are private between the player and the manager, but can you give us a taster of what Edu and Mikel said to Emil? And when you look at the sort of situation, how tough a decision was it for him? Did he need convincing that actually you need to leave Arsenal? Because when you leave a club like Arsenal, it's only one way, and that's very rarely up.
Yeah, I mean, for starters, obviously, as I said, there was never any sentiment from the club that he was a player that they wanted to move on. Emil was a highly valued member of the team that could contribute at any given moment, whether that be off the bench or whether that be, you know, thrown in the deep end in his first start and only start of the season against Luton and picking up man of the match. He was always available, always ready, and he was, you know, always very much fully focused on giving his most to Arsenal Football Club last season. And as I said, I through these conversations, it wasn't one conversation at the beginning. It was, you know, over a prolonged period over the course of the summer, that as momentum built in conversations with other clubs, it got to the point where it was clear that this was probably going to serve the best interest of everybody.
Brilliant.
Just, was there ever any point where you thought this isn't going to happen? And what was the single biggest challenge when you were trying to do this deal?
Oh, there's always lots of challenges in a deal. I think it goes in business in general, nothing is done until ink is on paper. I don't think this deal or any other deals in the football world are any different. It's a results-orientated business. I think now there's just as much scrutiny on senior management off the pitch, if you think about sporting directors, technical directors, etc., as there is the managers and the players on the pitch. No one remembers the deals that didn't happen. They only remember the deals that did complete. No one remembers who finishes second or lost the cup final, just who won it. So it was very much... there was a consistent communication process all the way through with different flows of momentum, but nothing's ever done until it was ink on paper.
Jordan, we could talk to you for a while longer, but time has caught us up. So thanks so much for joining us on the Transfer Show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, as you can see, Leicester have confirmed the signing of Jordan Ayew on a 2-year deal from Crystal Palace. More on that to come. Plus, the Premier League wrap is next. Stay with us.
Your bite-sized Premier League transfer round-up, Mark, take it away.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael. Yeah, let's start with Arsenal because they're close to adding to their midfield. The Real Sociedad manager says Merino has said his goodbyes and is finalising his move to North London.
We understand that Aston Villa are monitoring Raheem Sterling's position at Chelsea, but reports that talks have taken place are premature.
Bournemouth have held initial talks with Chelsea over a loan deal for goalkeeper Kepa, but he's just one of a number of options as Andoni Iraola looks to strengthen between the sticks.
We have 1 week left of this window, and Ivan Toney's future at Brentford remains up in the air, according to Thomas Frank.
Brighton are close to agreeing a deal with Fenerbahce to sign left-back Ferdi Kadrioglu.
Enzo Maresca wants to sign a striker in the final week of the window, but any deal to sign Victor Osimhen from Napoli is complicated.
Mark Gahey will start and captain Crystal Palace against West Ham tomorrow, despite 4 rejected bids from Newcastle so far in this summer's window.
Everton have spoken to Newcastle about the prospect of signing Kieran Trippier.
Fulham today have signed Joachim Andersen in a deal worth £30 million.
Well, Ipswich are in talks with Burnley to sign centre-back Dara O'Shea.
Leicester City have signed Jordan Ayew in a deal worth £7.5 million on a 2-year deal.
Liverpool are closing in on a deal to sign Georgi Mamadashvili from Valencia, although the keeper would stay in Spain for this season.
Speaking on his return to Manchester City, Ilkay Gundogan admits he didn't realise how well run City was before his time at Barcelona. Interesting.
Well, Mamo Ugarte again has been left out of the PSG squad for tonight's game as a move to Manchester United edges closer.
Newcastle are still assessing their options for the last week of the window. There could be as many as 3 new players with a centre-back, goalkeeper and a winger, all on Eddie Howe's shopping list.
Well, with just a week left of the window, Nottingham Forest continue to work on a deal to sign Eddie Nketiah from Arsenal.
Russell Martin is keen to add a goalkeeper to his squad, and Arsenal's Aaron Ramsdale is a target, with the 2 clubs in talks over a loan with a potential obligation should Southampton avoid relegation.
Right, Tottenham. Ange Postecoglou says there is still a fair bit he would like to do before the window closes, and he expects a couple of players to leave before next week's deadline.
West Ham target Carlos Soler has been left out of the PSG squad for tonight's game as the move to East London gets closer.
Wolves have walked away from a potential deal with Burnley for defender Dara O'Shea after the 2 clubs couldn't agree a fee.
Now, we understand Kieran Trippier wants to leave Newcastle United to secure first-team football. And that news has come as a surprise to his manager, Eddie Howe.
The situation is business as usual. Trips has trained really well this week. I'm surprised at a lot of the stories that have come out. A valuable member of the squad. His professionalism has been first class. He's trained really well since he's come back from the Euros. I think he's only had 2 weeks training, hence the decision to not start him at the weekend. It continues to be really valued by all of us.
Yeah, interesting thoughts there from Eddie Howe. He says he's surprised, Mark. What's your take on this one?
I'm surprised in a way. Ultimately, Kieran Trippier was the first signing for the PIF era at Newcastle, and when they were in 19th place in the Premier League, he was leaving La Liga champions Atletico. He was leaving the title to come to a relegation scrap in the Premier League when perhaps his Premier League days were numbered. It was a big gamble for him, and it was a big show of faith to Eddie Howe and what the project was. And Kieran Trippier has been a huge part of the success story at Newcastle. He's galvanised that dressing room. He's brought quality. You've seen with his performances just how good he could be. But he's clearly hurting at not playing. The captaincy is another issue. And this will be a tough one as well for both Eddie Howe and Kieran Trippier, because you have to remember, you go back to 2011, where Eddie Howe signed Kieran Trippier from Manchester City on loan for Burnley. So they've got a 13-year working relationship. They then turned that loan into a permanent deal for £400,000. And this might be one of those situations where Eddie will say, I do not want to lose you under any circumstances because A, I can't replace you, and B, you bring so much both on and off the pitch. However, when Kieran Trippier looks into the whites of Eddie Howe's eyes and says, Gaffer, I just want to play and I want this opportunity, I need a fresh start, please will you let me go? I think Eddie Howe might find it hard to say no in those circumstances. One to keep an eye on, we've still got a week of the window, but Newcastle definitely won't want to lose a player of his quality and experience.
You look at the Tino Livramento as well, a really good young player, but there's obviously that concern potential of an injury. We know the versatility of Kieran Trippier. But I like what you've said. We were in that morning, that very start, where it all started, that Kieran Trippier's signing as well. But you just wonder, with Bruno Guimaraes now having that team captain's armband, is Kieran Trippier now thinking, oh, one more big challenge for me? And what is a big challenge? An Everton.
That would be a huge challenge because we know the financial restrictions that they're working under. Got a new stadium on the horizon. Obviously avoided relegation despite a couple of points deductions last season. But he brings so much to that group. And Newcastle are in a similar situation. They may have on paper loads of money to spend, but PSR stops them from spending it. And therefore, if you go and try and find an experienced right back, you're going to struggle.
Mark McAdam, Michael Bridge. Oh, got serious there. Called you by both names. Don't go anywhere. Plenty more on the way as we count down to deadline day. We'll discuss what's in store over the next 7 days with Mark Gahey, set to be central to it. We'll get an update on his future next. Don't go anywhere. Next week, gentlemen, it will be deadline.
There's been 4 rejected offers. However, we feel like, based on the information we know from the last offer of 60 million plus 5 million in add-ons, that is close to what Crystal Palace would be looking for a player that's going into the last 2 years of his contract.
Mark, let me interrupt you there. You say there's 4 offers. The fact that Newcastle keep going back, the fact that they're still in talks, are they getting encouragement from somewhere to suggest that there is a deal to be done here?
They must be. They must be. And they've identified Mark Gay as a player that will really add something to that Eddie Howe Newcastle team. They clearly want to invest in him. They believe he is the right man when you look at the centre-back options that are out there. And clearly there's obviously been an opportunity where Newcastle think, well, let's just try and test Crystal Palace, let's see what we can do. But Steve Parish and Dougie Freedman have been really stern and upfront and honest. Well, this is what we want. Therefore, if you don't get to it, we'll continue to reject what you want to do. Now, Eddie Howe at some stage will say, actually, let's look at option number 2, if option number 2 is still available. We've got a week left. We also know they're in the market for 2 or 3 potential other positions. So do they say, actually, this is just getting out of control financially? And he said that very publicly. We can only pay what we believe someone is worth. If it gets to silly money, then we have to walk away. And they've done that in the past, because he talked about the Newcastle tax. At first, takeover happens, loads of money, new owners, we want this player, you've got to pay. And then you've got to pay a bit more because you're Newcastle. And they had to do that in circumstances, but they also decided to walk away. So I really couldn't guess it. But I think if there is one more offer from Newcastle, it will either be you get the player or the deal's not going to happen. I don't think this will rumble on and there'll be a 6th or a 7th. I think we'll have one more, and that will be take it or leave it.
I think you said that after bid 2, didn't you? Well, will he stay or will he go? That's the question for Mark Gahey. I guess that's the question on the same theme, Michael Bridge, for Ivan Toney. Thomas Frank said today he is unsure if the player will leave Brentford. What do you think? Will he move?
I find it another 50-50. I really do. Of course, they've got the interest from Al Ali, and that valuation's not been met anywhere near to what Brentford want. Now, if that's happening with a club in Saudi Arabia, you do wonder. So, it's a surprise after listening to him in January that he's still a Brentford player, but the fact is he still is. And I have to say, I think Thomas Frank's handled this ever so well, and I know he's probably so tired of hearing about it week after week, and we do apologise to him, but we have to You have to do it.
You have to start every Ivan Toney question with sorry.
Yeah.
Because literally for weeks and months, if not years, you talk about Ivan Toney because he's been a huge part of their success, but he drives headlines because he's a player of interest. And it's another one. I don't know what's going to happen. I genuinely don't have a clue what will happen. I'm surprised that a Premier League club hasn't shown their hand with some interest.
I was going to say, while we're out on the road next week, we will see our phones. Would it surprise you that a Premier League club out of nowhere comes in for Ivan Toney?
No. But whether it's enough to tempt Brentford into selling, that's the question.
Yeah, I think Thomas Frank once in a news conference actually counted the number of questions that he had on Ivan Toney. Just very quickly before I ask you the final question, Ipswich are showing great ambition during this transfer window. A possible 3 more deals in the pipeline. 2 look imminent. Jack Clark from Sunderland, he's been having his medical. It's worth around £15 million initial payment plus performance-related add-ons. Armando Broja, his loan with an obligation for a club record £30 million. That one is close as well. We're just waiting for formal announcements on both of those. And Ipswich in talks with Burnley to sign their centre-back Dara O'Shea as well. Michael, just finally, we've seen Dominic Solanke move to Tottenham, and that's the biggest deal between Premier League clubs so far.
He's injured.
Will it be the biggest deal by the end of next week?
No, I think there's still probably one more.
I think there's a blockbuster deal in the window left for a Premier League side. I think we've got a big one to come.
Mark McAdam, I've gone 2 names again. Michael Bridge, might as well do the same to you.
Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you very much indeed for your time this evening. The Transfer Show will be back on Monday. Tonight, can Leeds get their first win of the season? They're away at Sheffield Wednesday and it's live on Sky Sports Football. Stay with us.